Hello everyone, it is Glenn here at the Northeast Georgia History Center. We're so glad to be bringing you this special members-only presentation on a fascinating subject, money, banking, and credit in early America. Now, you may be asking yourself, why in the world is Glenn doing this? Is it interesting? Yes. Is it exciting? No. And you know, I will just give you a little brief in-look at this. Some of you may have picked up that I'm at heart, military historian. That's what I had trained in and studied in for a long time, ever since I was a youth. But as I've gotten older, I've decided to look at other things and things that even 10 years ago, I would have never remotely been interested in. I would have laughed if you had told me I would be doing a presentation on money, banking, and credit in early America. And yet now I have looked into this, and it's actually really interesting how this comes about. And I think one of the most interesting things is when you look at the way we conduct business today, a lot of the ways we do it are similar and yet worlds apart because we just take it for granted, right? We have American dollars in our wallet for those of us who still may carry cash, and we don't even think about what is the intrinsic value. Why does that merchant accept this $5 bill from me? What does he question it? Do they ever question it? I just scanned my credit card. How can they just accept that this piece of plastic going into a machine is actually transferring money to them? And so taking that sort of modern aspect and looking at how much it has made our lives easier to have these things as developed as they are becomes very clear when you look at colonial and early U.S. America, how they were able to conduct business, how they were able to use money. And so what I want to look at initially, of course, is the what and why of money. Money really is just the means of exchange. And it's something that was developed a long time ago. The first coins we've ever found in history come from a king named Croesus. And we still have this saying, rich as Croesus. He took silver and gold as an amalgam as well as separate alloys and minted the first coins. And it was sort of one of those things that trying to place value on something or trying to carry on trade became much, much easier if you were using money rather than a barter system. If I'm going to buy 2 or 3 wagon loads of grain from you and trade to you 1 wagon load of eggs, that's pretty complicated. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of muscle and effort. But if I just want to hand you a sack full of coins for those 3 wagon loads of grain, that's going to make things happen much faster. It's going to make things happen much easier, and we have all agreed that those coins have a certain amount of value based on the materials in them. And that's important to remember. Coins, especially the ones we talk about today, have intrinsic value. Intrinsic means that they are made of precious metals, silver and gold almost always, and those metals have a value in and of themselves as to what they are. You can take a handful of silver coins, $5 worth of silver coins, melt them down, beat them into a ball, throw them against the wall, drop them out of your pocket, they're still going to be worth $5 worth of silver. Not so much paper currency, right? Paper currency represents value. It does not have intrinsic value in and of itself. So paper money, really, the use of paper money is based exclusively and totally on, as they say, the full faith and credit. People have to believe and assume that it has value for it to be a means of exchange. And so paper money has had this sort of negative connotation attached to it ever since the beginning, but paper money also becomes a matter of convenience. And if it does have the full faith of the people using it, it becomes an incredibly useful means of carrying on trade, carrying on transactions. We'll get into why that is, especially in the American perspective, in just a moment. But it's important to remember that the coins have intrinsic value. Paper money has an agreed upon value that is sort of a part of the social contract. So when we first began colonizing colonizing America, the British, of course, are the ones we think of as our main forebears, and those are the ones I'm mostly going to stick to. But it's important to remember that in this time period, there's not a lot of money to be had in terms of coinage, gold and silver, the things that have intrinsic value. There's a finite amount of gold and silver in the world. And of course, One of the great things that happens in the New World, especially from the Spanish perspective, is that the gold and silver mines that were discovered and then conquered in Central and South America basically added to the sum total of valuable metals in circulation throughout the world. There are some estimates that it increased by almost 100%, 50 to 100% of the amount of money in circulation, which of course made Spain very, very wealthy and a center of these precious metals. And everyone wanted to get a hold of those metals, whether they got them legitimately through trade or whether they simply captured and stole the silver from the Spanish treasure ships starting all the way back with Elizabethan England. And that carried through all the way through the colonial period. But those coins have intrinsic value. And one of the things that became a fundamental source of money in the American colonies was not the British money of pounds and shillings and pence, but of the Spanish milled dollar. Now, let me also go ahead and make very clear that what I'm going to be showing you today, 100% of it is, unfortunately, replicas. They're reproductions. They don't actually come from the past. They're just modern representations of it. So don't try to break into the History Center thinking you're going to be carrying off trillions of dollars worth of ancient gold coins. They're just made of pewter. But come along with me and pretend that they're real. So what you have here, this is a great example of a Spanish milled dollar, right? You can see this one has a date 1755, and the Spanish create a lot of these coins. This is how they make precious metals into money that can be spent. And what's interesting is that this is sort of a specific ounce. This is a 1 ounce silver coin, right? 1 ounce of silver has a particular value based on its weight. And so, a lot of countries are going to begin basing their forms of money on this 1 ounce silver idea. You have here a Spanish milled dollar, you have here a French écu, you have here a German thaler, T-H-A-L-E-R, and you have here a British crown. You'll notice that almost all of those are the exact same size and weight. The German thaler is going to be a little bit less in diameter, but it's also a little thicker. So what you have here is a 1 ounce coin, a 1 ounce of silver coin. And that sort of becomes the way that you can exchange these different pieces of money at different rates. So let me take these away over here. But the Spanish have a lot of this silver that floats about, and it provides a lot of the money. Britain, of course, has its own denominations of money, but it's incredibly complicated, and I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit slowly. For those of you who understand pounds and shillings and pence, this will be old hat, but it's not like it is now. In I believe the 1960s, Great Britain decided to move towards decimalization of the British pound. Here in America, we have the dollar, which is 100 cents, and a dime is 10 cents, and a nickel is 5 cents, and on like that. The unit of value is divided into 100. That's what's happened with the British pound, but it didn't used to be this way. A British pound started off long ago as 1 pound of silver, but the denomination sort of picked up. And what you really have is pennies. You have pence. And I have here 2 halfpennies, halfpennies, that equal 1 penny, 1 penny of British coinage. It takes 12 pennies, or 24 halfpence, to make 1 shilling, right? 1 shilling is a very, very common denomination of money. 20 shillings makes 1 pound, right? So 1 pound is 20 shillings. Ironically, the British never, at this point, came up with a coin in the amount of 1 pound, right? Because that would be, of course, 20 ounces of silver. That's a good bit. They do have crowns. A crown is 1/4 of a pound, or 5 shillings. So we have 1 pence equals, 2 halfpence equals 1 pence. 1 pence times 20 equals a shilling. 5 shillings equals 1 crown. 4 crowns equals 1 pound. Now, what you see in the British denominations is a guinea, a golden guinea. This would be made of gold. And the gold of course, has a good deal more amount of value to it than the silver. So this guinea is worth 1 pound and 1 shilling. In other words, 21 shillings is the value of this gold coin. And carrying one of these around in, say, the 1770s is the equivalent today of carrying about $500, right? So this gold coin has a lot more value to it than the copper or the silver coins. Now, here's the interesting thing. Britain had passed laws because it did not have a huge amount of these intrinsically valued coins to circulate in the British economy. So they passed laws that forbade, generally speaking, this hard currency from going overseas to its colonies. That includes the American colonies. So even though we're talking about British coinage, the British coinage did not circulate very much in colonial America, believe it or not. Now, it was the type of money that was used to account for how much money one had, but it wasn't the actual money. This is why it gets so complicated. People are evaluating things in pounds and shillings and pence, regardless of what kind of money you're going to use to buy it. So they have to develop charts, right? Well, if the British colonies are not circulating British money, what are they going to be circulating? This is where we come back to those foreign coins, right? We have Spanish mil dollars, we have French écus, we have German thalers. There are also Portuguese silver coins circulating about. So these silver coins from other countries are the main types of hard currency circulating through the colonies. They have intrinsic value. If you can get this kind of money for your services, this is what you're going to get. But if there is a shortage of money, well, what is one way to put more money into the economy? That's right, we can print paper money. And Britain also passed laws to prevent colonies from individually printing paper money, but they did allow some exceptions. Now, a couple of exceptions are very interesting. When Georgia is founded in 1733, the trustees have to find some means of exchange that the colonists in Georgia can use. And so what they do is they work with the British Parliament and they establish that they will have a certain fund of hard currency of pounds and shillings and pence in the trustees' treasury, and the trustees will then issue paper notes equivalent to the value of that hard currency within the colony of Georgia. And so these are called sola bills, and you can see this has a value of 1 pound, and this one's dated a little bit after that, 1749. But the trustees did evaluate these, and they passed. And this one, to make sure they're real, they're going to have actual writing and signature. All these paper coins are going to have actual signatures by people who are involved with the trustees. So for every paper note that the trustees issued, someone in the trustees is going to have to sit there and sign every single one to assure that they are, in fact, legitimate means of exchange. A little later on, during the French and Indian War, when the colonies were hard-pressed to pay for all these huge expenditures that were going on in the war, North Carolina, which was notoriously one of the poorest colonies, decided to issue what they called proclamation money. And these paper denominations were not backed by any sort of hard money. But what they were good for is that you could transmit them to the government at a later date in lieu of taxes. And this was sort of a way of, it's called fiat currency. It doesn't have intrinsic value. They just printed these things up. Here we have a 26 shillings and 8 pence, which coincidentally was what a North Carolina militiaman was paid per month. So they just made these in whatever convenient denominations they needed to fund the war, and then the soldiers would be paid in these, and they exchanged throughout the North Carolina economy. People accepted them because they knew that when it came time to pay taxes to the colonial government, the paper money could actually be used to pay those taxes. No actual things of value have changed hands. But basically what the colonial government of North Carolina was doing was borrowing money from itself in the future. So rather than taking in actual money for taxation later, they would accept these paper notes and they would be able to then keep the economy going. They would be able to keep the war effort going. So this is the beginnings of paper money in the Americas. Only in Boston, in Massachusetts, do we know that colonies actually issued coinage. And Great Britain and its parliament put a stop to that pretty quick because they wanted to control the monetary supply. That's what the mercantile system and colonization was all about. So those are just some of the means of pre-independence money that are going to be floating about in colonial America. Now, it's important to remember that you have to keep accounts. This is what merchants and even family members have to do, right? They have to make accounts, and they have to account for this money, and it's accounting versus cash. So if I'm a merchant and I have a bolt of cloth that is for sale at 6 shillings, and someone comes in and wants to offer me, let's say a French coin for that, well, I'm not going to not take it because it's hard money, right? But I have to have a way to know what the value is relative to that. And so in Great Britain, they issue these charts that show you how much each one of the coins in circulation are worth, not only in relation to British money, but throughout certain respective colonies. So we see here a chart like this that's set up for British pounds and shillings and Portuguese johans and German thalers and Spanish mil dollars and things like that, and you'll be able to translate what the different values are. Do you see how complicated this gets? Do you see how insane it is to try to be a merchant or try to conduct business in colonial America with all these different denominations, different values based on which colony you're in? How are you going to account for it? How are you going to trade? It becomes so complicated. I'm re-emphasizing this so that you understand how easy and simple it is today. This is where we've come from, but it complicates the issue greatly. Now, and by the way, so what happens if I pay for something with a coin like this, but the value of what I'm buying is actually not the exact amount? Are they going to make change? Sometimes they are, and this is a very interesting thing. This is one of the things, so as I said, Spanish dollars circulated through the American colonies very, very openly and frequently, and in a nutshell, that's why there were so many of them. That's why America, after independence, adopted the dollar rather than the pound as its main denomination of currency. And we have here, a Spanish dollar. What they would do to make change is they would simply chop them up. So instead of a full dollar, you could cut it and you would have a half dollar. You would have a quarter dollar, a quarter, get it? A quarter. Or you could have these bits, which would be an eighth of a dollar. And you can see that a half and a quarter, and these two bits equals a quarter. That's why they would say 2 bits equals a quarter in the late 20th century. It all comes from the denominations of the dollar. So people could chop these up and make change this way. Of course, they flowed within the economy because they have intrinsic value. The paper money, you can't just rip in half and give someone that back. That's not going to work. So after independence is achieved, and that's a whole other issue of financial troubles, people are trying to figure out how the economy is going to keep going. And during the war for independence, the biggest problem the Continental Congress has isn't defeating the British Army, it's paying for its own army. And people have to, again, they hope that people will take the time to have faith in the currency. Well, again, it's fiat currency. The Continental Congress issues paper money on the hope that they're going to win and that people will accept it as a means of exchange. And of course, the willingness of people to accept U.S. Continental money very much varies based on how well the Continental Army and the cause of independence is going. If it's going okay, people might be willing to take the money. If it looks like the U.S. is going to lose, why would you take that money? It's not going to have any value whatsoever. And so a very common saying that we've heard of is not worth a continental. That's because the United States issued continental money, continental dollars, right? Let's see. So here we have some great examples. We have one here that, and notice the years too. This one comes up. This is in 1776. We have just declared independence. It looks like we might be doing pretty well. And this is a $3 Continental note. Notice how complex the edges are. Notice how the seal on it is really cool. It's been hand signed. And notice it says, this bill entitles the bearer to receive 3 Spanish milled dollars or the value thereof, according to the resolutions of Congress, which means that if we win the war, after the war, you can exchange this seemingly worthless piece of paper for actual silver coins. Now, how the United States is going to acquire these silver coins is a different issue. We'll have to think about that later. But in 1776, $3 is not too bad, right? That's a good amount of money. Well, what happens is, as they keep spending more and more of this money that's not backed by hard currency, it becomes valued less. This is called inflation. The more money is put into the economy, the less the actual money in the economy is worth. And so, to give you an idea, we have, here's another continental currency at the value of $20. Look at this. This is even signed in red ink to prevent counterfeiting. It has some marbled paper here on the edge to prevent it, and they have some things on the back too. Printed in Holland cellars. An interesting thing, if you think about it, if you're willing to print money for a revolutionary government and the British find out, do you think the British are going to come and get you? Yes, they are. And so the British are very clever. They don't just want to wage war with an army, they want to wage it financially. So one of the most devious plans the British come up with is to print a lot of fake continental dollars and put it into the economy and just flood the economy with all these fake dollars. People don't know what's real, they don't know what's fake. It makes them less willing to take it, and because of inflation, it makes them worth less. And so you can see here, by the time we get to 1779, that almost same size bill, look at this, $80. We have an $80 continental bill here, and who in the world knows in 1779, it's a pretty dark time for the American Revolution. You don't know if you're going to win. So why in the world would I take money for this, or exchange my goods, my hard-earned crops, the clothing I've made, or anything like that? Why would I exchange it? Because it's already been counterfeited. The efforts to make these denominations and the actual paper dollars so complex are efforts to prevent counterfeiting. But of course, if one printer can create something like this, another printer can. And people are not going to pay that much attention. The states themselves, not only the Continental Congress, but the states during the American Revolution are also trying to issue money to pay their troops, to pay their war debts. And we have here another great, a great example. Here's some from Georgia, right? Entitles the bearer to 1 Spanish milled dollar, or the value thereof, according to the resolution of Congress. And these they didn't even bother to print anything on the back on, because it's only worth $1 in 1776. We're probably going to win. Don't worry about it. And then inflation kicks in. And then we have here's a $5 denomination that seems to, well, maybe we're having to spend some more. Another little cool Georgia thing here, a beehive. And then, by the time you get to 1778, oh my goodness, this bill entitles the bearer to $40, right? And they do start putting some things on the back, again, to prevent counterfeiting, but it's sort of too late at this point. By the middle of the American Revolution, the Continental Congress, the states are deeply in debt because they've issued so much of this paper money. And here's the great trap that they've got into that makes people worry about the United States, even if it wins the war. And it does, right? We know that the American Revolution was a success, that we achieved independence from Great Britain. Hooray! Now, all that paper money we told people to please accept on our behalf is suddenly good. And so when independence is achieved in 1783, suddenly, the second it's a valid independent government, the United States government and all 13 state governments owe tens of millions of Spanish milled dollars to the holders of those paper notes, those bills of credit. How are they going to do this? How are they going to pay off their debt? Independence will mean nothing if we're not able to pay the debts that we accrued winning our independence. We'll just crumple as a country, and all of that would have been for nothing. So we begin to work through systems. We begin trying to make things work. And this is where, that ever so popular character, Alexander Hamilton, comes in. He comes up with a plan to secure the financial stability of the United States. The federal government will assume all state debts, and then the federal government will organize all debts into a scheduled repayment process. It will recognize and accept all those continental dollars at par. That means that instead of saying, well, if you have a $40 note, we'll give you 5 Spanish mail dollars, they're going to accept it at full face value, and that suddenly makes those continental dollars worth face value again. It's a huge shift in the local economy. He also helps establish a Bank of the United States, the first Bank of the United States, and it plays into the way things are going to stabilize the United States. But even this late, even the different states are still struggling with exactly how their money is going to work. Because remember, nothing says that there's going to be U.S. dollars. At this point, there's continental dollars, there's state dollars, and there's independent things. Here's a picture of a Georgia banknote, a state banknote. Even though they issued them in dollars during the American Revolution, here's one after independence that's in shillings and pence. They still haven't determined exactly how American currency and American money is going to work. That's one of the reasons that bank becomes so important. And so we have the first Bank of the United States. And this is an image. You can see the columns out front. This is the building that the first Bank of the U.S. was housed in. And the U.S. Bank becomes incredibly powerful. There's some constitutional debates we won't go into, but the bank has some basic jobs. First of all, the bank is going to hold all of the money that the United States has come into it, from tariffs, from land sales, from any other taxes. The Bank of the U.S. will hold that money. Then, the Bank of the U.S., if it's required to, can loan money back to the United States. It can make loans to the United States. And United States senators or representatives are going to sit on the board of the bank. The bank's going to be able to sort of help control the economy, help control the money supply. So what happens is these banks have to come together and agree that they will create denominations. This becomes a great states' rights issue. The first Bank of the U.S. determines that it will not issue money, only silver coins, silver and gold coins. So we have, the United States only intends to issue coinage, not paper money. This is going to become important. So, but it has different denominations. Of course, we'll start off with a half penny, right? A copper half penny, and then we have a full penny issued by the United States mints. And we all know these, right? How many pennies in a dollar? 100 pennies. So we have a half dollar, which is worth 50 cents. We have a full dollar, which is worth $1. This becomes an incredibly common denomination, and it has American some symbols on it now. Notice that all the European currency had either the royal seals or profiles of the kings themselves. Not here in the United States. In the United States, we have Lady Liberty, and we have our national symbols of eagles and things like that. So we have half pennies, pennies, dollars, half dollars, and then we're going to need some larger denominations. We have a $2.50 gold coin. We have a $5 gold coin, and then we have a $10 gold coin, right? So one of these, you need 10 of these to make one of these gold coins. You can see how the value adds up. And that's how the United States is going to conduct its business, because these coins have intrinsic value, and the Constitution even says that only the United States government has the power to mint money. The states do not hold that power. Well, minting implies coinage. And then the states get into the conversation of, well, it says mint, but maybe we don't want to mint. Maybe we just want to do paper to make the economy work. Again, because if I'm going to conduct business, if I'm going to buy a farm or try to sell my crops or something, huge bags of coins are going to become very difficult to tote around. They're going to become, they're just not easy to use, right? So we're going to need, again, an easy means of exchange. And this is how banks work. A bank will form within a state. It can either be a private bank, it can be a state-sponsored bank, but they're going to have investors, and those investors will put gold and silver coins within the bank. Let's say that we have the Bank of Northeast Georgia, and we have investors who have put $10,000 worth of silver coins in the bank. So we have specie reserves, right? And then that bank is going to hold those, and it's going to issue paper money to the value of the gold coins, because the paper money still says this can be exchanged for so many dollars at this bank on this date. So the paper technically is backed by hard currency. Well, to make things work in the economy, banks have something called fractional reserve. What that means is that they may issue more paper notes than they have coinage in their vaults. So if I have $10,000, maybe I want to issue $15,000 in paper notes. This works fine as long as everyone doesn't come at once trying to get their hard money out of the bank. This allows the bank to make loans in greater values than it actually possesses. And banks today even work this way sometimes. And really what happens is it depends on how you manage it. If the bank is responsible and it has a low fractional reserve amount, it's not going to create a lot of money. If someone wants to get rich, they're going to loan or create the paper money 2, 3, 4 times what the bank holds. This becomes a problem. People find out. They have a run on the bank trying to get their coinage out, and then the bank fails. And if a bank fails and it has your money in it, your money disappears. There is no insurance. There is no way out. The money's gone. And so a bank failure could be a catastrophic event for individuals or for communities. Now, there are some banks that pop up all over the states of the union, and they are usually chartered by the state legislatures. We have here Bank of Augusta. They give different values of denominations, right? Here's $1, and it says we'll pay on demand $1 in coins. We have here a $2, right? And notice they all have these really cool, intricate designs that, again, are designed to work against counterfeiting. Because if you counterfeit this money, you're also going to make a very legitimate bank go under because they can't afford that. We've got $10 here. Look, there's James Oglethorpe, the founder of Georgia, right? There's Ben Franklin. So this is, even though this is a Georgia bank, there's still very much a national feel to things. Another $10 note. We can go all the way up to $20 notes. Bank of Augusta. There's Sir Walter Raleigh. And here on a $50 note. Now this is a good chunk of money to carry around, right? This is 10 of those gold coins. This is 50 of those silver coins. We've got Washington. We've got Madison. And we have notes down here. We have the state seal. And notice that they're also numbered. Each one of these is going to have a separate number. It's going to have a separate signature on it. And so these are ways that they try to make the money valuable. Well, if, again, these banks can just pop up anywhere. And this is part of the problem that people like Andrew Jackson have with the banking system, is the banks can become unreliable, the banks can be crooked, the banks can take poor people's money and make rich people rich. It becomes a huge issue. So this is one reason that Andrew Jackson goes so much against the banks. And it's important to remember, too, that there is no paper money of United States value in the economy, except for a little bit during and just after the War of 1812. In those times, the United States actually did issue some, as I said, bills of credit that were the first U.S. dollars. Here's a $100 note, right? Because they're trying to finance the War of 1812. They want to retire these and get them out of circulation as quickly as they can after the war is over. And so they start to redeem these at a fantastic rate. And some of the banks, however, want to make quick money, and they have denominations that are less than $1. Any paper money less than $1 is called a shinplaster because they could be practically worthless. These denominations less than $1 didn't even figure into a bank's fractional reserve. They didn't really think they were worth that much money, but people exchanged them as a way to conduct small business. But the paper ones were not worth a whole lot. And as time goes by, banks began to fail. If the economy starts to go south, people want to get their hard money out of the bank. And if a bank has issued more paper notes than it has hard currency, and people begin to make those demands on the hard currency, the bank will fail. If one bank fails, another bank fails, and eventually what you have is a full-scale financial recession that occurs throughout the entire country. And these happened pretty frequently in the early 1800s. Especially there was one in 1837 that had a huge effect on the national economy, and that's one of the big reasons Andrew Jackson has as much power as he has to undo the second Bank of the United States. He says it has too much power over the economy. But here's the thing, Mr. Jackson, you don't understand, is that it also provides a stabilizing and leveling out of the economy, because the full faith and credit of the United States was assured because of the Constitution and because of the sheer size and volume of exchange that the national bank was able to undertake. State and private banks simply were not remotely able to take that into account. So when the second Bank of the U.S. goes away, it creates a ripple effect that has great and detrimental effects on the economies, because you have paper money circulating, you have coins circulating, and it's important to remember that these coins are still around. Remember that Spanish mill dollar that we were talking about? There were so many of those in circulation, and there were so many of them that were still in the United States. These were considered legal tender in the United States until 1850. You could still circulate Spanish mill dollars as dollars. It's pretty remarkable when you think about that. But we've talked about money and currency and denominations. One final thing I want to go into, which is far more common today than it was back then, is credit. Right? Today, most of us do most of our purchases by credit card, right? When we go to the store, when we order things online, we just use that number and it goes through so easily we don't even think about it. But credit was an incredibly difficult thing in colonial and early American history. There were a couple of different kinds of credit. The most common was book credit. If you were working with a merchant, for example, if you needed a hammer, some nails, and maybe a saw, you would go to that merchant, and that merchant would write in his book that you owed him certain amounts of monies, let's say $10, that the nails and the hammer and the saw cost, and you could take that. And you would take a note, you would sign a note that says, I owe him this much, and it will be paid back within 6 months. So then, as I made money, I would bring things. I would bring 10 cents, 50 cents, $1 to the merchant, and every time he would enter it in his book, and that receipt that I had signed, we would both make notations saying that payment had been made. And it would happen that way. Sometimes, let's say I had $1 left, but I had 50 eggs that I was willing to trade to the merchant. If the merchant accepted that, that would also be put into the book. We have a combination barter and money type of credit. So credit was very much a personal thing. Banks could make loans. They did not make small personal loans. Most of the times these banks that I was talking about are going to make loans to planters, to farmers, and folks like that for large purchases. There's also the issue that you could borrow money personally, but people tended not to do this except within family units or very, very close friend units, because the fear of not being paid back, there was very little recourse if a friend or a relative borrowed money from you and they didn't pay it back. Even if you had a written statement, you would still have to go through the court system, and families suing each other in courts doesn't go very well back in those days. And so it really starts to have an effect on how people are able to get extra money. And it really comes down to those banks. That's why banks are so important. They can provide loans, they can provide credit, but it's a very, very unstable thing. Now, what I've talked about is sort of on a personal level, on a personal shopping level, merchant level, farm level. One other thing I want to talk about is on this great national level. We've only barely touched this when we talk about Alexander Hamilton and the assumption of debts across the country. But one of the most interesting things, and this is really what led me into being interested in this, is the Louisiana Purchase. We talk and know about the Louisiana Purchase. Mr. Jefferson made a deal with Napoleon. It was only $15 million. Lewis and Clark went and explored it afterwards. It doubled the size of the United States. The end. Well, a student asked me one day, well, how did the United States actually pay for that? And I had no idea how to answer that student. So I had to go do some research. And it's mind-boggling. And at the time, the amount was mind-boggling, because usually if that much money was going to transfer hands in that time period, it was done through an army marching into it, conquering it, and then a peace treaty being signed afterwards. It was you paid for it in blood, which was actually much easier than paying for it with money. But here we are with the Louisiana Purchase. It is by far the largest real estate deal that had ever happened to that point in history, and is still one of the largest deals that has ever happened. $15 million, 80 million francs. You don't just write a check for that in 1803. You don't have that many coins sitting around in 1803 to just shift it to France and pay for it. How was this done? Very simply, there's a lot to it, but very simply, we have to go to the big banking houses in Europe, and especially Barings Bank in London. So what happens is Barings begin to negotiate between the French government and the American government for the exact pricing. And what happens is, to make it a little bit easier, the American government agrees to assume about $3 million worth of French debt that France owes to private American citizens. And so the Americans accept that, which leaves only $12 million that they have to pay. So now the Americans don't have this kind of money lying about, so they make a deal with Barings. Barings, B-A-R-I-N-G-S. Barings will actually pay the French government the actual cash in installments, in actual hard currency, in gold and silver coins. Not all at once, but in installments over a series of several years. In exchange, the Barings Bank will have bonds that says the United States owes us this much money. Then Barings Bank will sell those bonds to British citizens at varying amounts so that they can get a good return. So, for example, a Barings bond might have a 20-pound bond that it sells, that I would give them 20 pounds cash, and then in return, within 5 to 10 years, I would receive 25 pounds, right? So I'll make a profit by loaning them money. And then that way they're able to recoup their losses of paying France. The United States is going to have payments dribble into Barings Bank as time goes by, and it's a very complex international situation. What's really interesting is when you remember this was smack dab in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars. Great Britain and France are in literally a national death struggle with one another for competition of control of trade and of the continent of Europe, right? 1803 happens to be a one-year period in the Napoleonic Wars where Great Britain and France are at peace, which is the only reason this deal is able to go forward. So the Americans promise to pay the British. The British transfer 80 million francs worth of money to France. France turns around, guess what they use that money for? To pay for the war with Britain, when the war cranks back up in 1804. And so now the United States is stuck paying Britain for money that it goes to war with Britain in 1812. France and Britain are fighting each other until 1815, and private companies in London are negotiating and handling all of these exchanges. It's so complicated, and it really actually scared the merchants in London. They could not believe the amount and the size of this transaction, but nevertheless, it did go forward. Even though the war carried on, all the payments were still made, and the payments were finally settled up. Of the $15 million that the United States had to pay France, Barings Bank in the end was able to make for itself about $1.5 million. So they did come out pretty rosy in the end. It's a good thing the British won that war. So we've looked at money and credit and banking in the Americas from before independence during the colonial period, going through till we win our independence, all the way to some of the biggest purchases in early American history. This is a fascinating subject, but as we say, this is only in a nutshell. We hope you've enjoyed this. It's a really interesting topic. I have a couple of sources if you would like to know more. One of them is online, and it's by a fellow named Ron Michener, and it is Money in the American Colonies. And you can just follow this link, and following the link will take you right to a great but brief article that kind of just highlights some of the things I've said in a little bit more detail. And if you want to look a little bit more at American finance and banking in the early part of the country, there's a great book called Other People's Money. That is, again, it's a short read. It's available on Amazon, but it goes into a lot more detail, but not too much detail, about how banks worked, about fractional reserve banking, and how these loans and banking houses were able to work with each other and make early American finance work in such a complicated world. So the next time you go online and just put in a few numbers to purchase something, or you run that card through at the grocery store, or you just hand over a $5 bill, I want you to think about how easy we have it nowadays compared to the conglomeration of a mass of confusion of early American banking, money, and finance. Thanks for joining us. It's you members that make this possible. We want you to continue watching this summer. We've got a lot of great programs going on. The reruns on Wednesday, but we've always got something fresh for you. So until we see you next time at the Northeast Georgia History Center, please stay safe and take care.